I've been doing this work a long time. I spent 3 years taking students to a maximum security prison outside of Philadelphia, but the way they put this, I was just completely floored. And if you know, the whole question of resources to schools, resources to prisons, is almost too much to bear, thinking about. And I first came across this when I was teaching at Villanova, and I was taking the kids the students to Graterford, and I realized that it was costing more to send a young man to Graterford prison for a year than it was to send a young person to Villanova for a year. I thought, this is really seriously screwed up. Okay, so let's think about resources. And these are pictures of 3 different projects that I have had some involvement with. So before I actually talk about the resources themselves, I want to go back and talk about an idea that David and I are thinking about, which we're calling networks of literacy sponsorship. So we've said something about the definition of literacy and the definition of community literacy. Now I want to go back to, most of you I think probably know Deb Brandt's famous definition of literacy sponsorship. And when I teach it to undergraduates and even graduates, but particularly undergraduates, they really struggle with that last phrase, and gain advantage by it in some way. And Deb tends to really focus on it in order to get us to think about what institutions get out of all this work and why they might block some people and not block other people. And in this situation, I always tell my students to do a thought experiment. Say, imagine that the Philadelphia public schools actually work. Imagine that every Philadelphia school graduates the same number of kids who went in 9th grade, in 12th grade, and all of them can read or write at the level of being able to go to Temple. What would that do to you? And the answer is, it would be a real problem. Because suddenly, right now, Temple has 30,000 applicants and they allow 4,500 students in. If the Philadelphia schools actually worked, they'd have 80,000 applicants for those same maybe 5,000 spots. So suddenly the Philadelphia schools are doing, I don't really want to, and I'm not blaming anybody in the Philadelphia schools that they're nefarious enough to think this, but in a certain way the Philadelphia schools are doing exactly what they're getting paid to do, which is to hinder some people from going on so that there's less competition at the next level. Now, I tend to differ with Deb, not so much that I love Deb's work, and by the way, her new book, The Rise of Writing, if you haven't read it yet, you have to go out and read it immediately, because it will make a lot of sense of the things that you're doing in your projects, because she makes the argument that writing has overtaken reading as the necessary and central function of literacy in our culture. But when I sent Deb some of the work I'm doing, she said to me, Eli, you need to go back and use your definition of literacy that I proposed in Round My Way, because my focus really for the last 30 years has been really more on institutions and how do institutions function so where she's tracking the lives of students and learners, adults and little children, how they get sponsorship along the way from various people. I'm interested in how institutions function as sponsors. How do they see themselves as sponsors? How do they not see themselves as sponsors? So this project is much more built on my definition, which emphasizes the institutional part. So in my definition of sponsorship, or authority is mostly what the term I used, authority is not a psychological quality. Authority is a social quality derived from institutions. So those of you who have PhDs or master's degrees or bachelor's degrees, what does that paper mean? What do all those gowns mean? What does all that stuff on your resumes mean? It all depends on the juice that you can pull down from the institution that you're associated with, that you're identified with. That if they wake you up at 3 in the morning, you say, "Oh, I'm an X." I come from this. I'm a baseball player, and I can speak as a baseball player about how a double play works. Okay? So I'm interested in what institutions in a place like Philadelphia, how do they function? Institution writ both large and small. So you don't have to read all of this stuff. The main reason I put this up here is because is for the definition at the top, which is thinking about, okay, how do we think about networks of sponsorship? How do we think about the ways that there are that in a city like Philadelphia, or really even in a rural area in Arkansas, there are multiple institutions that are doing somewhat similar things. So my list there is just a list of things that we could think about doing, like language support for immigrants, housing. There are many different ways you can, multimedia production, and so on. Churches, museums, what David and I decided is that we would focus, on 3 areas: healthcare, urban farms or farming, and community arts. So I'm going to talk to you about those 3 areas, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about community arts because that's the area that I'm probably going to write. That's the chapter I'll probably write next. So I'll start with health clinics because it's the one I know least about. I have a fondness for health clinics. My father was a plastic surgeon in the Army. I went to medical school probably largely to find my father. And so I've always, when I did writing across the curriculum, I spent a lot of time working with the science folks because I could speak their language. I taught science for 5 years in high school. So I'm interested in how health clinics operate as literacy sponsors. And if anybody here is or knows anybody who's a diabetic, you know that diabetes is a literacy issue, because once you walk in that clinic and the person says your glucose is really high, you have the reason that you're thirsty all the time, you're peeing all the time, and you're hungry all the time is because you have diabetes. So suddenly you got to figure out what this means. Does that mean I'm going to lose my leg right away? Does that mean I'm going to what does it mean? Well, it means you have to get really knowledgeable about how your body works and be able to control your sugar levels. So that's a literacy issue. It's not only a literacy issue, but from where we sit and the way we think about things, it's a literacy issue. So this is an example of a clinic that was started by a doc at Temple who's now unfortunately moved to Chicago. But it's Puentes de Salud is focused on the Mexican community in South Philadelphia. They do a lot of work with prenatal care, but they work on other clinical things. And what I love about this screenshot of their website is that they put it right out there. Is that their function is health services, education, and research, and it really demonstrates for you that health clinics have to have that education. I mean, if you have training as a nurse, or you know anybody who has training as a nursing degree is in many ways an education degree, because you've got to know a lot about how to teach people to do their own breast exams, how to teach people how to do breastfeeding or what foot care and so on. So it's a very, very education-centered career, and the lamentable thing about doctors is that they don't really recognize that about their own profession, and it's one of the things that nurses are always exasperated about doctors about. But doctors themselves, the more evolved doctors, recognize at some point in their careers that's really the business that they're in. Urban farms. This is a map. I love this map. This is a map. I have a friend named Chris Hill who has been really interested in urban farms for many, many years. And so every year in the last, I think he started this about 6 years ago, he takes an urban farm bike ride. And he starts one place and we bike about, this year we did about 20 miles. He's done as many as 40 miles. There are all these urban farms in Philadelphia. And so we go on these bike rides and visit these different farms. So one farm is very little, I mean relatively little. It's smaller than this dining hall. And it's built around this guy's house that he bought a vacant house and rehabbed it. And it's mostly, actually, it's a lot of flowers, and it's more, it's almost like an English garden. And then there are some gardens here that are really quite vast and have small plots. There's one garden we went to visit. They have small plots that are available for immigrants who've come and who don't like the food that is available to them in the few food stores that do have produce. So they have to grow their own. And in one case, the folks who are refugees from Congo, who have a very hard time trusting anybody because they've been through such terrible, terrible experiences. One of them said to my friend who was working on this farm, I'm not going to trust you until we can grow cassava here, which is really a challenge because you can't grow cassava in Philadelphia. But they're going to try to do some things. So this is an urban farm that I've been working with that's just off the Temple campus. And these people are just, they're amazing, amazing young people. The three people in the middle are Janine, who comes from Oakland and who is a spoken word poet, Dev, who lives across the street from the urban farm, and they met him because he was stealing stuff from them at night, and they stopped him and they said, you know, why are you stealing from us? We're trying to raise a farm here, and he got kind of interested in what they were doing, and he's now one of their, he builds all their stuff for them. He's an incredible carpenter. And then the other guy is Alex Epstein, who I met as a first week freshman. But even as a high school student, he brought, 50 people from his neighborhood in Park Slope, Brooklyn, to work in New Orleans right after Katrina. And he has this unbelievable native ability to do community organizing. So this farm is, unlike a lot of urban farms, which are run, many of the urban farms are run by young, idealistic white people who, you know, went to school at, you know, in Vermont or something like that, and they want to live in the city. And nothing again. I love Vermont. It's one of my favorite places to go. But I'm just saying, you know, and what happens is that they go there and they make their farm, but they don't really know how to relate to the people who live around there. And the people will come and say, well, what are you growing? And, well, could you grow some okra? And they say, oh, okra, I've never eaten okra. How do you make okra? So they start growing okra and so on. But this group has really been able to build a farm that people have been involved with from the very beginning. And literally, Dev was involved from almost their first week. And they are now doing a lot of work with adjudicated youth, where they come in, they work on the farm, they build stuff, and they work with Janine on spoken word. Janine has spoken word poetry of other poets to come in and talk. They write, they do all kinds of stuff. And I was just at a ceremony earlier this week where they just graduated this group of guys and gave them, you know, diplomas and things like that make us all feel good. And then and the mayor was there. And mural arts was involved, so they painted all these murals. And these guys, and they stood up and just said, you know, look, I was doing some bad stuff, and I don't want to keep doing bad stuff. So anybody here want to give me a job? I'd like a job, right? So this is again, part of why I want to do this is that we are not doing this in separation from what's going on economically. We are doing this in the midst of, the kind of depression level employment that is the case in urban areas, even with this so-called recovery. But these people are just, these are people, I don't like to use this term, but really they're my heroes, because they're just amazing young people. The problem is, and this is why Steve and I talked about this, because we live here, is the problem is Janine wants to go back to Oakland. Her heart's in Oakland. And Alex is like 23 years old. He's not going to stay there that long. And he keeps telling me, yeah, I'm going to stay here for a while, but I know he's got his sister in Southern California. He's got a whole world to do. And I don't want to tell him, no, you have to live in North Philadelphia for the rest of your life. But on the other hand, that's what it really takes to be in a place where not only do you know about it, but like Chris in Cincinnati is talking about how he went back to Cincinnati because his father did community organizing, so people remember his father. I mean, that's what we need. The problem is that's not what American society supports. So it's a very rough thing that we're trying to do. So I want to finish with these last few slides about community arts. Community arts is really dear to me. As a poet, I was raised in a very literary kind of canon, and the people who meant the most to me growing up as a poet were people like Williams and William Carlos Williams and Pound and Marianne Moore and so on. I don't write slam poetry. My son still laughs at me about mixing up R. Kelly and Jay-Z once. Now, some people get this joke and some people don't get this joke. But I do care about the way the arts brings to life everything we talk about in very linear ways. So this is Treehouse Books. I can't give a talk without talking about Treehouse. Treehouse is actually not fully an arts program. We do arts. We also do book groups and various kinds of things. But I love this picture. It's really a goofy picture. And this is right off of the Temple campus. It's about 2.5, 3. It's about a 10-minute walk from my office. And we focus on the kids in the neighborhood 6 to 13, but the kids do keep coming back as they get older. So, some of them come back. So Treehouse is the one I know best. We started it over 10 years ago, and we just celebrated our 10th year as a 501c3 nonprofit. And so much can happen in an environment where you don't have grades or standardized testing or people telling you have to sit in your seats in rows and so on. Now there are way many more stories than I have time to tell you about Treehouse and the neighborhood around there. So I'll just end with these last two slides. This is Pepon Osorio. Some of you may know him. He's a very famous community arts person. If you don't know him, write his name down, look up his work. He's just an incredible Puerto Rican artist. Grew up on the island and then in New York, but he lives in Philly. He's actually the chair of my wife's department. And he got a MacArthur grant, and that apparently sets you up for life. He did this great project, which you see in the background, and I just brought my grad students to it because it's in one of the classrooms of community arts at Temple, where they were closing all these schools. They closed 23 schools about 2 years ago in the Philadelphia school district, and a lot of kids were really displaced and dislocated by that process. So Pepon went into one of the schools in the Puerto Rican neighborhood and basically loaded up a truck with furniture. from the school. And then it took him about 2 years to do this project, but he's brilliant at getting funding. So he put in an installation in the Tyler School of Art, an installation of the Fair Hill Elementary School. So, and behind him you see a video screen. There are, I think, 8 video screens, and with kids speaking different parts of a poem that was written by one of the kids about what it feels like to have the school closed. And behind him, you see the wall. On all the walls are these big versions of notebook paper that the kids have written essays about how they feel about their school closing. And then the teacher came in and wrote red marks on, about the grammar and, good job, can't wait for the revision, It's really cool. And I brought my research methods class to it because this is it's not the only other version, but it is another version of ethnography. It's what in the arts world is called arts-based research, right? But you walk in there and spend a half an hour in this installation, and you absolutely get, I don't know that you get what the kids felt, but you get what you feel. And the kids did all kinds of things, like they have this like puppet mural of the superintendent of schools and his assistant superintendents, and it's really a trip. So I'm going to end this with some questions that I want you to ponder. And since we're about out of time, we're not going to have time I wanted to have you talk to each other and take questions and stuff, but you got to move on to the next station. But I would ask you to think about these questions as we move into the second half of our show here. And I'm happy to talk to people. Anybody, I'll be here till early Sunday morning. So, but what I'd like you to do is think about at least these 3 questions, along with all the questions that you've probably developed for yourselves. So the first question is about the nonprofits that many of us work with. It worries me sometimes because I work with nonprofits. We do things that are kind of cool. I think that we have some evidence that we've done something to change the lives of some of the kids. We've done some things to help parents find jobs and so on. But this is a minuscule dent in what's going on in Philadelphia, and yet it does seem to be something that I can do. And when I retire, which God willing is very soon, I could do more of it. So I can spend more time with the non-profits or with whoever mural arts or wherever I end up being. But there really is a question, how do we match what we see as needs? The biggest need that I see is jobs and job training, and what we see as resources. This one, I think, we talk about reciprocity. We talk about mutual connections. We talk about all the things that we do really believe. But does this really work? Are we really able to make change based on this mutuality? And is there something else we need to do that goes beyond the paradigm we now have about mutual reciprocity? And then third, I will leave you with this, which is something that haunts me and I think should be, you can't read that. It reads like this: why do you care to do this work? Now, I'm not asking this question in a psychoanalytic way, because quite honestly, if you're doing the work, I don't care why you're doing the work. If you're doing it well, that's fine. But I think the question is, how do you do it well? And that's where you have to ask yourself, out of what paradigm, out of what need do I act in my way? And how can I be? I'm not asking for purity. I'm not asking for, I'm not asking for, I don't know what I'm asking for at all. I mean, in many ways, my answer to why do I care is that first slide about all those people that I work with, is that this means a lot to me to see all of you in this room. This means a lot to me. And I hope that this doesn't have to grow to be 600 or 800. I think 400 is pretty cool. But we do this work partly because of the other people we know who do this work. And it's not that we're trying to be, compete with. I'm trying to compete with David Jolliffe to do a better job. I can't compete with David Jolliffe. He's got an endowment. I can't compete with David Jolliffe, but he's also really much smarter than I am. So it means so much to me to walk into a place like this and see people, some of whom I've known for 15, 20 years, and some of whom I only met last week. So that's an incredible thing to see what we have growing here. The people who've been doing this fairly recently, the people who've been doing this 10 years and 20 years and so on. That in itself is a reason to care, to keep doing this. But obviously there are many other reasons, and many of them have to do with that list of those slides about needs. It's very hard for me to think about living in my really nice house in Mount Airy and know that there are kids who go to Treehouse Books who on some particular days can't walk outside their apartment house because they might get shot. So on that cheerful note, I will invite you to go out and keep talking, because this is way cool, and I will see you around. Thanks so much.